Hello, and welcome to Street Aesthete. This is the show where we explore street view coverage of a noteworthy location, looking out for beautiful architecture and stunning scenery, while I amuse myself by remarking on what we see, and you rejoin me in the Dutch capital, Amsterdam, for our second exploration of the city. Last time we started at the central station, we walked down this main road here as far as this square, then back up this main road here. We took something like 25 minutes to do that, so we really took our time enjoying the architecture and the various landmarks that we could find. Now, we ended around the canals here, which I certainly want to explore, but I'm actually very curious about some of these pedestrian alleys in between the two main roads. So what we'll do now is we'll start off back at this square, and we're going to walk up this central alleyway, looking from side to side at each of the other streets that we pass, and then we'll see how far we get. We'll start to look around the canals. So we'll drop in straight away, just here on the edge of the road that I'm interested in. So let's just orientate ourselves. So we're here by the Koninklijk Palace, and now we shall get into the pedestrian alleys. As you can see, a very busy city, and we've got some fabulous architecture on the side of the street here. Really an embarrassment of riches that the Dutch have got in their capital city here. It's an interesting situation with the capital city of the country, in fact, in that in most countries, the parliament building or the sort of the main government offices of the country are generally housed in the capital, but I think that's not the case in the Netherlands. The Parliament building for the Netherlands is actually in the city of The Hague, Den Haag, which is a bit further west and a bit further south. But historically, Amsterdam has always been the largest city and a bustling trade port, very much the heart of the Dutch mercantile empire, which expanded very much into Asia, to Indonesia, and also to various Caribbean islands like Curaçao, and even continental South America, think of Suriname, and indeed the Dutch had a presence also in South Africa. Something that I particularly like about Dutch streets is the use of brick for the paving and this very classic zigzag pattern that we tend to see all over the Netherlands. And it's not a sure way of recognising the country in GeoGuessr, but it can generally point you in the right direction. Just interested to see what one of these side streets might look like. And lots of little details everywhere, this lovely balcony. And it must be said that not all of the facades are extremely interesting, but the sheer variety on display is really what makes these streets. The variety of colours, the red brick here, the white, and some more brown brick, and some continuity. We've got this arch and little porthole window, and then an arch with a different shaped window here, and then a different top part of the facade altogether on the next building. And as we proceed down this street, we start to get into what looks to be some newer building work. Much less distinguished, it must be said, but we can't fault them for taking cues from the older buildings of the city. We've got the beautiful red brick here, a lot newer as we can see, but in keeping with the rest, and the white highlights in between. And then this is rather an interesting building as well here. We've got glass, concrete and steel by the looks of it, but actually the shapes and the sort of rippling effect here is quite attractive. We could definitely see worse, and indeed here we do. We've got this awful sort of cladding style around the windows, and indeed this looks as though it may even not be occupied. That's the sort of thing that could either be knocked down or at least have some added stucco on it to add some nice ornamental features. And we've got a beautiful Flemish style step gable there that we can just see the edge of. And look at this really wonderful window piece. I particularly like the green and the reddish brown of the window casement there. And a beautiful interior arcade here with some interesting mosaic tiles on the curved roof and these gorgeous chandeliers. Just fantastic to have something like that as a public space, and indeed some more mosaic tiling on the paving with this sort of perhaps a maritime motif harkening back to the Netherlands' imperial history, and then perhaps even there's something of a Buddhist iconography here about the wheel, the samsaric wheel of rebirth. Perhaps that's a nod to the religions of the Far East, where the Netherlands extended its empire to. And I know some people do get building fatigue, but it's not an affliction that I often find myself with. I really just can't get enough of this sort of thing. I love the way that each of the stories of the buildings here, and hence the windows, are at slightly different elevations, and so you don't get a consistent set of parallel lines sweeping across the row of facades here. You get this sort of higgledy-piggledy effect, which is just very pleasing to the eye. And when you couple that with where we can potentially see that these buildings are slightly subsided, they're tilting one way or the other because of what might be the unstable foundations underneath. Remember that Amsterdam was built upon essentially a huge bog. And then also you get, although I don't know if we can quite see it here, we'll look out for it elsewhere, perhaps we can see it in this building, the way that the facades lean out slightly at an angle, leaning out towards the street. And the reason for this was because of something I mentioned in the previous episode of Exploration, the hooks for pulley systems for getting things in through these windows which wouldn't fit in the doorways or up the staircases. In order that large items being winched up wouldn't bash against the building, the facade has to hang out over the street somewhat, and that gives the facades of these buildings a bit of a sort of a quirky character, as though they're sort of faces peering out over the street. And I did just note this that I wanted to draw your attention to. Some really charming brickwork here, just lots of lovely details. Much less interesting here, this more modern offering. As I said before, Amsterdam, I know you can do better. Don't let me down. There's something a little bit spooky about this, the way that the street is almost empty of pedestrians when we saw it so full up earlier on. I wonder if it's perhaps the time of year. Apparently this is July. It's a very grey, overcast looking July. I wondered if maybe it was the dead of winter and no one was around, but no, as you can see there was, well, he's gone now, but there was a chap on a bicycle in shorts there. Ah, you know what? I've just realised it was 2021. I won't go into why the streets might have been empty because I'd rather not bring that up. Instead, we'll just admire the lovely woodwork here around the front of the building. Unfortunately, a smashed window there, but some really lovely Art Nouveau style designs in the stained glass window there. And it's just wonderful, again, to see the sweep of the facades here and the variation in colours and patterns. I love it. I really can't get tired of it. Such an exciting city to explore. And it's great to see the rhyme in the design. You know, we've got these red and white stripes here, rhyming with the, well, not quite red, but the sort of the darker brick and the white stripes here. Absolutely fabulous. And again, some lovely stained glass window designs there. And as fantastic as this street has been, I can't help but feel that it's been let down somewhat by this terrible facade here. Now look, it does have one thing going for it that I would be remiss if I hadn't mentioned, which was it had this sort of wavy pattern on top, which at least broke the parallel lines. But actually, when we get right up close to it, and this is the angle that you're most likely to view it from, we can see just how uninspired and ugly it is. Yeah, so this is trash architecture. If you're the architect who designed this and you happen to be watching, your work is terrible, and I think you need to find yourself a new profession. Anyway, some more cheese in the window here. We noted that in the first episode. And we've got a great example here, I would say, of the facade leaning out over the street here in order that things hanging from the hook being winched up aren't going to hit the side of the building if they swing to and fro. Right, okay, so at the end of this street here is actually where we stopped at the end of the first episode, so I think we'll proceed here and we'll make our way back to where I initially intended to begin before I realised that I was interested in this particular set of pedestrian streets. Very nice curvature in the window there, and lovely to see a gable reflected in this window. They're just so characterful, these. It takes what otherwise would have been a fairly boring facade, fairly rectangular, and just adds so much charm and character to it. You've got these baroque curly features either side and this more sort of classical design on top. And it almost looks as though we could be looking at the head and shoulders of a cartoon character. They're almost like very tall, thin Dutch people. And indeed, the Dutch are renowned for being among, if not the tallest people on average in the world. And so it's fitting that their buildings should reflect their physical stature. This is rubbish. I'm sorry, I'm not impressed. Amsterdam, I know you can do better. And now we come to a bit of a crossing of the ways, and in fact I believe, yes, this is one of the streets that we were traversing earlier, and so we'll carry on through this alley until we get to the canal. And again, just such an exciting place to be, surrounded by people exploring and enjoying themselves. We've got a head shop here. That is something else that Amsterdam is particularly known for. Its liberal attitude to recreational narcotics. Although I think it's something that the people of the city are trying to change. They want to change their image from being a place for British stag doos to go and party. We think of the red light district, or of the easily obtainable drugs. And I think they're trying to make it more difficult for tourists to partake in these things. But if you ask me, the reason to come to Amsterdam is none of those things. It is the incredible architecture. And as much as I enjoy exploring it in Google Street View, which, as I've said a few times on this channel, is a fantastic resource, there's nothing quite like being there in person. Now this is just fantastic. I love this scene. Really, really admire this very much. On every layer, there is something remarkable to view. I like the street names here, and I always enjoy seeing Dutch or Flemish language written down because it's so sort of familiar in a way. At a single glance, it could easily be mistaken for English, but then it's not quite, and it's not quite German, but it's got hints of that. It's a very peculiar language, all its own. And I find that exciting about it. Then, besides just looking at the entrances to the shops, which are interesting in their own right, I always start looking from the first floor up. And we can start to see here the designs of the little flowers here below the balcony. These little classical features here, adding a little bit of extra distinction to the facades. Then we have these wonderful window casements, some pleasing geometric designs in the windows. And though we can't quite see it from this angle, there's probably some fantastic gables to be seen there. And yeah, again, just the variation in colour I also find very pleasing. The red, the dark brown, the green window casements. Just so pleasing. So much to enjoy walking through the streets here. That would be a cosy little spot to enjoy a coffee. And next to this beautiful tree, in fact, something we haven't seen quite so much of so far in Amsterdam, and it is something that I love to see in a city. We've not seen so much greenery, and that may be partly because it is such a man-made environment. The city was practically dredged out of the bog. It's not the sort of place that the people of many other countries would have bothered to build on, but of course, if you have a rather small and low-lying country like the Netherlands, you've got to make do with what you've got. It's a great combination of all the things I love to see here. We've got these beautiful shutters, a step gable, some wonderful red brick, and these arches are very exaggerated, especially in the way that these parts. I really ought to learn the terminology for these. I'd like to know a bit more about what the right words are to describe the things I'm seeing, but I love these, what I'm going to call limestone blocks set into the arch. And great to see in the summer, the windows open. Now, this one, I think I'm going to let it pass. It's interesting enough and has enough sort of alcoves and bits of the facade inset from street level that it does keep your attention. It's actually in some ways a little bit more interesting than this more traditional style here. Yeah, so far it's been a pretty great section of the street. Very few modern boring blemishes. And the way the sun's hitting the brick here is just fabulous. Very nice little detail there, reflected in the window. Beautiful. And now we come out at the canal. Now, this, looking at this view, I think is where we ended the first episode, and it may be that I'm actually going to end in the same spot and continue next time. So where shall we go? Shall we carry on down this street? Shall we go further down the canal? I think this street might be the one to go down. So that is where we're going to leave it for the second part of our exploration of Amsterdam. Believe it or not, we're only a couple of 100 meters from the train station where we started at the beginning of the first episode. There's just such a density of incredible architecture here that you needn't travel far for aesthetic satisfaction. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part of our exploration of Amsterdam. If you've enjoyed the music that you hear in this video, then do take a look at my first channel, which is where I upload all of my original music.